decline of the liberal arts in like the 80s, like the Reagan years. It may have been a mistake and caused the further untuning of the sky. So we're gonna try to revive the literature and poetry and literature. Similarly, the lute, upon the belly of which Genesia inscribes her unexpressed complaint in the third book of Sidney's Arcadia, is not actually a muse or genius of expression so much as a confidante under a veil. Sidney says, she's contented to cover her never-ceasing anguish, has made the lute a monument of her mind. So we're talking about making the lute a monument of her mind. Unquote. The inscription begins, my lute, which in thyself thy tunes enclose. Thy mistress' song is now a sorrow's cry. The couplets, which conclude both of the poem stanzas, employs figures from musical practice. The first uses the notion of a inaudible ground bass. Interesting. There's music that has a ground bass. What if there was a inaudible ground bass or continuous theme for variations or divisions? Quote, and though my mones be not in music bound of written griefs, yet be the silent ground. Well, that's like the basic harmony, could be the harmony here. It's like if you had a song, right? There was, what would the bass be if you were singing a song and there was a mythical bass note somewhere that you don't hear? The final couplet moralizes the fact that the taut dinner treble strings of a 16th century lute were relatively louder than were the heavier bass courses, and that on all stringed instruments, as the strings are stopped lower, down, closer to the bridge, the string length is diminished and the pitch of the resulting sound raised. Thus, quote, thus in thyself least strings are loudest found. In yourself now. Is this a selfie? Thus in thyself. No, thus in thyself. Least strings are loudest found, and lowest stops to yield the highest sound. In yourself. This thought has followed and paralleled a similar figure about the injustice of deserts in a wicked world. Quote, thus noble gold down to the bottom goes, when worthless cork aloof doth floating lie. Other instances of musical figures, such as a type employing either the lute or some more general musical phenomenon or myth, are too frequent to discuss here. Purely instrumental figures throughout the 16th and early 17th century tend by and large to substitute lute, harp, lyre for each other, even in translation. A rare exception is in a commendatory poem of Hugh Holland's prefixed to Sir Thomas Hawkins' translation of Horace, 1625. This is reading from Hugh Holland poem I before thy dainty touch upon the lordly violl, but of thy lyre who knew so much before this happy trial, so tuned is thy sacred harp to make her echo sweetly sharp. I wrote not how to praise enough thy music and thy muses. Read the poem again. I knew before thy dainty touch upon the lordly violl, but of thy lyre who knew so much before this happy trial, so tuned is thy sacred harp to make her echo sweetly sharp. I wrote not how to praise enough thy music and thy muses. It's a commendatory poem of Hugh Holland's prefix to Sir Thomas Hawkins' translation of Horace, 1625. Here the lyre, as the classical instrument, is distinguished from the lute, our contemporary one, and the contrast is made to correspond to that between various sorts of poetry. The Sacred Heart may very possibly refer to Hawkins' translation of the sacred text into some earlier time, but the use of various sorts of instruments to symbolize the appropriate poetic modes is unmistakable in the other two cases. Holland's use of the instruments to indicate poetry itself, of course, belongs to the tradition of neoclassical poetry, in which, following both the Latin practice of using Carmen for poem and the Renaissance's developing knowledge of Greek music and musical theory, poetry and music are identified. It is improper, I feel, to consider this a case of musical imagery as such. The party carp and the juggler's fiddle were always taken in or received synecdoche, while for the whole of their art, all classical traditions aside, it is particularly in connection with the neoclassicism of the French Pléiade, as well as Jean de Baif's Academy, and of the Sidney Circle in England, that the music poetry identification takes on much importance in later 16th century poetry. It's true that much of the controversy over prosody that was being waged at the turn of the 17th century either touched upon or alluded to musical questions. Though it is strange that Thomas Campion, a strong advocate of quantitative scansion over the debased practice of stress, scansion, and rhyme, never applied his knowledge both of musical theory and practice to this question in the manner of Baif's verse on musique majeures. Sir Philip Sidney used music to mean poetry, perhaps as much as any Elizabethan man of letters, but he was also capable of perceiving the independent course which poetry was to take separated from music in the modern world. Throughout the defense of prosody, he employs music both as symbol and analogy on the one hand, and as a separate art on the other. The most impressive of all these references to music comes from the course of Sidney's discussion of the quantitative axial controversy in an analysis of ancient and modern methods of versifying. After having described them both, he continues, whether of these be the more excellent, would bear many speeches, the ancient no doubt, more fit for music, both words and the time, serving quantity, more fit, lively to express divers passions for the low or lofty sound of the weighed syllable. Sidney here makes use of the argument traditionally applied to music itself, and like the composers and writers of the Baif circle, he defines quantitative verse. Here we have quantitative linguistics, way ahead of its time. Quantitative theory. He finds quantitative verse best adapted to music, but in his great sentence, Sidney makes a point which renders slightly more general is crucial to the understanding of the post-classical divergence of music and poetry. They tend to diverged. Why do they diverge? That's the problem we're talking about here. We got untuned to the sky. How do you retune it? Of the modern actual prosody, he remarks, the latter likewise with his rhyme striketh a certain music to the ear. That's it. Thus delineating for the first time, perhaps, the notion of... That's because I have to go out early today, because I have to go to Manhattan. There, you understand? Music of poetry, which remains a commonplace even of today. About the quantitative actual question, Sidney concludes, and in final, since it doeth belight, though by another way it obtaineth the same purpose, there being in either sweetness and wanting in either majesty. One commentator has remarked that Sidney's interest in classical prosody resulted from his attempt to accommodate verse with to music. Rather, one might say, both his concern over prosaical matters and his interest in the music poetry analog stem from the common source in his larger attempt to accommodate some of the aesthetic standards and models of antiquity to the exigencies of what he already saw as a national literature in a national language. Well, did we solve the issue quantitatively? I don't know. We were reading from issues about music and poetry with quantitative analysis and we heard about the inaudible ground bass on page 139. Readings from the Untuning of the Sky in an attempt to get it retuned up again.